this session, we want to talk about what makes a good missional engagement strategy. But before considering the practical aspects of a strategy, I want to challenge you to think about 3 theological foundations that I'm convinced need to inform or shape or really determine the content of your strategy. Let me share what these 3 are, and then I want to come back and very briefly discuss each. Number 1, it's recapture the missionary nature of the church. The second is rethink mission. And the third is reclaim the priesthood of all believers. So first, if we really want to have a robust missional engagement strategy, we need to recapture what I call the missionary nature of the church. Now, to fully grasp the missionary nature of the church, we must first start by being reminded that God is a missionary God. There is this amazing theme throughout all of Scripture that depicts God as a sending missionary God. One example of this is what's called the sending language in Scripture. It's amazing, but there are hundreds and hundreds of times throughout all the Old Testament and New Testament where God is constantly calling men and women out and sending them to participate in His redemptive purposes. Let me give you an Old Testament and a New Testament example, and then let's discuss why this is important. Now, in the Old Testament, there's this Hebrew verb that we translate to send that is used over 800 times in the Old Testament. But what's interesting is 200 of those 800 times, it's used with God as the subject. In other words, it's God who commissions and it's God who sends. We see this sending language in all the historical books of the Old Testament. We see it in the poetic books of the Old Testament, but it's especially prominent in the prophetic books of the Old Testament. Probably the most famous example of sending language in the book of prophecy is Isaiah chapter 6, verse 8. And I love this example because that Hebrew verb is used twice in this one single verse. When Isaiah says, "Then I heard the voice of the Lord saying, 'Whom shall I send, and who will go for us?' And I said, 'Here am I, send me.'" But when you move into the New Testament, you see the sending language in all of the Gospels. It's in the book of Acts and all of Paul's epistles. Probably the best example of sending language in the New Testament is the Gospel of John. But think about it like this. The Gospel of John opens with the incarnation. John chapter 3, verse 16 and 17, which I would say is the ultimate sending. God the Father sends the Son. Then the Gospel closes with John chapter 20, verse 21, where Jesus says, "Just as the Father sent me, now I'm sending you." What's fascinating is between those 2 verses, nearly 40 times, Jesus refers to Himself as the one sent by the Father. So here's what we see in the New Testament. God the Father sending the Son, God the Father and the Son sending the Spirit, and God the Father and the Son and the Spirit sending the church. So why does all of this matter? Why does it matter that we recognize God as a missionary sending God? Here's why I think it matters. It's because the nature of the church is rooted in the missionary nature of God. In other words, if God is a missionary God, and He is, then we as His people are missionary people. Now, my favorite way to say this is to say it like this. The church doesn't just send missionaries. The church is the missionary. So your missional engagement strategy must start with helping people see that they are a sent missionary person. They need to understand that they live where they live for a purpose because God sent them there. They work where they work for a purpose. They hang out in the social spaces they hang out for a purpose. So part of your missional engagement strategy is to help them see that the church is a sent missionary people and they are a sent missionary person. So second, I think we need to rethink mission. What I mean by rethinking mission is that we must recognize that this isn't our mission, but it's all God's mission. Missio Dei is a little Latin phrase that means mission of God. It's just a reminder to us that it's all about what God is already doing. It's not about our techniques. It's not about our human ingenuity. It's not about how smart we are. It's all about what God is doing. So your missional engagement strategy needs to be in large part about discovering what God is already doing in your context. And it's about becoming great observers and great listeners and great learners. A large part of your strategy must be about listening to your community to discover what God is already doing and discerning how He wants you and your church to participate. Really, it's about those two simple words. It's about discovery and discernment. Then lastly, we need to reclaim the priesthood of all believers. Listen, your greatest resource in your church plant isn't your preaching. It isn't your building. It isn't the location where you meet. It isn't some particular program. The greatest resource in your church plant is your people. No strategy will reach every kind of person except a strategy that mobilizes every kind of person. In other words, we must activate all the people of God. So as you begin to create a missional engagement strategy, think of these three theological or missiological foundations: recapturing the missionary nature of the church, rethinking mission, and reclaiming the priesthood of all believers.